Hi, Dr. Egan here. We're still on Chapter 1, the science of psychology. In this section, we're going to start talking about research methods in psychology. We're going to start off by talking about naturalistic observation, case studies, and survey research. Naturalistic observation is a method of collecting information on humans or animals by observing and recording behavior in their natural environment. Okay, so I have a couple examples listed here. One of them, I'm just going to point out the bottom one, observing and recording symptoms of stress in mothers whose infants are in the neonatal intensive care unit. Okay, so in that situation, I would go into a hospital NICU and I would observe and see what symptoms of stress I see in the mothers. I'm not necessarily interacting with the mother in any way. I'm not manipulating the environment in any way. I'm just there to observe what is this, what can I see? What can I observe with my own eyes in this particular situation? And using that information to describe what's happening. The advantages of naturalistic observation is that it's a very natural setting. You get to see spontaneous behavior. You have the opportunity to see behavior that's possibly varied. Disadvantages is that observer bias can play a strong role in influencing how I, as the observer, interpret behavior. So I might observe or record behavior that is irrelevant. I might focus on something that's just not important. I might only write down the behavior that's in line with what my suspicions are. So, for example, if I suspect that mothers are very stressed out when they have babies in the NICU, I might not note in my observation the times where the mother seems very calm and is very present in the moment with bonding with her baby. I might not notice the times when the mother expresses a lot of gratefulness to the medical personnel. I might not notice the times when the mom and the dad are working together and collaborating to help care for their child. I might focus instead on the times that mom was crying, or when mom was pacing back and forth, or when mom was, raising her voice in concern about something, a medical procedure. So you have to be really careful of how people interpret the results of naturalistic observation. Not the results, but just the data that they're able to witness. Ways to minimize bias: you can have video recordings where you are able to watch that event happen over and over, so you can really get all the nuances of it. You can make sure that the observer is really well trained in how to observe, and they know what they're looking for, and they have a clear idea of how to collect data, things like that. If you have people who where you have more than one person who's able to go in and compare observations with each other. So if I go and observe the mothers who have babies in the NICUs, and somebody else, also another psychologist, goes and observes, and we can compare notes and we say, oh yeah, we're noticing the same sorts of things, that can help minimize bias. And then the last way to minimize bias would be to have a very structured, like, data form where we we really specify what it is we're looking at, counting the incidence of times that mom was crying when she was in the NICU, or the number of times that she was raising her voice, or the number of times that she reported not being able to sleep the night before. Whatever it was, is really having it done in a precise scientific way. That can be another strategy for minimizing observer bias. A second type of research method is called a case study, and this is when you have a really detailed description of a single person, or maybe like a really small sample group. So you're finding a lot of really descriptive, in-depth information about a particular case. So the case here that I'm referring to in this picture is a very famous one, named a man named Phineas Gage, and he was working at his place of work, some sort of manual labor, and a pole, as you can see here, was projected into his skull. And surprisingly, he lived, and he was able to talk and interact with doctors and things. And so they ended up using him as a case study when determining sort of what the functions of the brain were, because they could see what parts of his skull were pierced by this pole, and they could see that he had some personality changes, memory changes, and they used his kind of oddball injury to gather a lot of information about um, different areas of the brain did, what functions they had. So it was a really informative opportunity for these doctors because, but at the same time, like, people don't get injuries like Phineas Gage again. So it's not like all of their information could necessarily be generalized to other patients. So that's one of the disadvantages, is that while the advantages is you can get a lot of information and you can really form hypotheses, some disadvantages is it's not necessarily going to represent other people. It's a very time-consuming way of collecting information. It can be very expensive because of that, and there's a lot of potential for observer bias. So if you're just the information about Phineas Gage is about as good as the doctors who were working with him, because they could have chose to, just like in the naturalistic observation, they could have chose to focus on certain things and not on other things. Survey research is when you have a questionnaire or an interview and you administer it to a selected group of people in order to gather information. So you can do it, in different formats, face-to-face, written, or computer. We love our computer questionnaires in our modern times. Advantages: it allows a lot of data to be collected quickly. We can get to a lot of people. It's a very cost-effective way to collect data. But disadvantages is that you can have a questionnaire that's really poorly written. It might not be asking questions that really truly pertain to what it is you're trying to measure. It can result in people answering in a very vague way that's not very helpful. It's also very reliant on the test taker or the survey responder to be honest. If I'm only collecting information on you about, based on this one survey I'm giving you, and I'm not observing you, I'm not interviewing your parents, I'm not checking in with your roommate or whatever it is, and I'm just relying on the survey and you're not honest, then obviously the validity is going to be very, very low. Depending on how the survey's conducted or constructed is what I'm trying to say. Researchers can end up asking very leading questions. So I'll give you an example. My ex-husband is a physician, and he, during his residency, worked at Johns Hopkins in Baltimore, Maryland, which is has very high usage of heroin. And he was taught, when he was interviewing patients in the emergency room, to, instead of asking them, "Do you use heroin?" but he would say, "When is the last time you used heroin?" The way he was trained was that if he asked them, "Do you use heroin?" their knee-jerk reaction is to say no. But when it was just put out there of like, "When's the last time you used heroin?" it seemed to elicit more honest answers, as far as people saying, "Oh, today," or "last week," or whatever. And that was obviously a really crucial question to get the answer to when they were determining medical care. So, and just another thing I want to mention about all of these, the three that I just covered, is none of them can be used to determine causation. Okay, we can't just determine the reasons why we might be seeing something. These methods of data collection, naturalistic observation, case studies, and surveys, are used to describe behavior only. Okay, I just want to be really clear. It does not establish a causation. In order to establish causation, it needs to be an experimental research study, and we're going to discuss that next.